Zumbi is a man of African descent who lived in the 17th century in what is now Brazil, and he led one of the largest and longest slave revolts in all of history. Once villainized in Brazilian textbooks, Zumbi is now seen as a symbol of freedom and fortitude for people throughout the world. By examining the remarkable life of this leader, as well as his influence, we can celebrate Zumbi's life, determining that Zumbi was a revolutionary slave hero. Proof of this statement lies in three subtopics. First, that Zumbi escaped from slavery and gained power. Second, that as king, Zumbi wanted all slaves free. And third, despite defeat, Zumbi's legacy lives on. Demonstrating his physical strength and absolute intellectual opposition to slavery, Zumbi left captivity to fight for the freedom of all slaves. First, Zumbi escaped from slavery and gained power. In an article for the New York Times, journalist James Brooke writes about Zumbi's early life. Zumbi was born in 1665 in the Quilombo, which is a Portuguese word for free African colony. And this Quilombo was named Palmares. The current leader of Palmares was Zumbi's uncle, and his name was Ganga Zumba. At the age of 6, Zumbi was captured by the Portuguese. He remained in captivity for almost 10 years until he escaped at the age of 15. During his enslavement, Zumbi was raised in a Catholic monastery where he was very well educated, and he became fluent both in Latin and Portuguese. He was well liked and relatively well treated, but Zumbi left slavery with an absolute profound hatred for all forms of enslavement. He survived as an adolescent in the mountains, hiking over 100 miles back to Palmares. In an article for the journal Phylon, which is a journal of African American studies, scholar Irene Diggs writes of Zumbi's return. He was greeted with open arms and quickly made a military advisor. As the commander of the army, Zumbi received a leg wound in a skirmish with the Portuguese, but that wound actually served to increase his prestige among the Palmarians, who revered injuries received during war. Now that we've looked at Zumbi's early life, we can turn to how he rose to become king. The second proof that Zumbi was a revolutionary slave hero is that as king, Zumbi wanted all slaves free. In order to understand Zumbi's leadership, we can look at the political structure of Palmares at the time. Scholar R.K. Kent talks about this society. Estimates of its size range from 5 to 20,000 people, although it was likely on the larger end of that. Palmares was in existence for about 100 years before it was finally defeated. During that time, it was subjected to nearly constant raids, first by the Dutch and then by the Portuguese. Shortly after Zumbi's return to Palmares, Ganga Zumba entered into an agreement with the Portuguese, which stated that Palmares would remain undisturbed as long as it returned all new runaway slaves back to captivity. This treaty, however, was not acceptable to Zumbi and to many other Palmarians. According to scholar Irene Diggs and others, Ganga Zumba died shortly after signing the agreement, and it's likely that he was assassinated, and that likely took place at the hands of Zumbi. Zumbi was immediately made king, and shortly after that, raids by the Portuguese and their hired Indian mercenaries started and became constant. The Palmarians fought for their own independence as well as that for other slaves in captivity. And although Palmares was fighting a much wealthier and better equipped army, it maintained its independence for 23 years. The third proof that Zumbi was a revolutionary slave hero is that despite defeat, Zumbi's legacy lives on. In an article for the New York Times, journalist James Brooke writes that the Portuguese hired slave hunters and mercenaries in order to eventually defeat the Palmarians. The final battle lasted for about 42 days and left all of the Palmarian men dead, leaving only women and children. Legend is that Zumbi threw himself off of a cliff. That seems kind of unlikely. What is clear is that Zumbi disappeared for a few months before re-emerging with a small group of followers to wage a guerrilla-style war from the hills. And he did that for about 2 years, until one of his followers betrayed him, allowing the white settlers to capture him and behead him. Zumbi's influence on modern Brazil is profound. Jack Epstein, a journalist for the Christian Science Monitor, writes about the 300th anniversary of his death in Brazil, which was made a national holiday. Zumbi had long been a cultural icon and a symbol of freedom for Afro-Brazilians, but in more recent decades he has become that for all people in the area. The history books no longer write of him as a fugitive, but rather as a powerful fighter against oppression. Now that we've looked at the Zumbi's life, it seems that his place in history ought to be well established. Zumbi's life and mindset were absolutely extraordinary. His unwillingness to accept freedom, if that freedom was dependent on the enslavement of others, is a proof of his radical vision of abolishment. Because Zumbi escaped from slavery and gained power, because as king Zumbi wanted all slaves free, and because despite defeat his legacy lives on, we know that the world is a different place because of this man who lived so long ago. This is why Zumbi was a revolutionary slave hero.